And my wife resents me, I think, because my life hasn't changed. You know, I've sold more books and I've won more awards, and I go out to my cabana of cruelty and I write.
That's your cabana of cruelty.
This is it. This is where the magic happens.
So is this actually a cabana in the garden?
It is a cabana, yeah, in the back garden. Oh, we're live, I think. We're out.
We're out. We're there with everyone. So hello, Michael.
Hi, Juliet. How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you in your cabana of cruelty we were just discussing?
Yep, this is it. This is where the magic happens, or the dark deeds are done, or at least thought of anyway.
Have we got murderers just lurking behind the windows?
I know. Well, tonight it's going to be a dark walk back to the house. I don't write at night because otherwise I might scare myself on that walk in.
I'm already scared that I might be seeing faces at those windows.
I tell you what, if a possum drops onto the roof of the cabana, I do rather levitate.
Well, I'm going to start. It's lovely to be talking to you tonight, Michael. I had wished that we were going to do this in person. I know we would have had a ball with our bubbles, but we will carry on at a distance and still have a ball. Good evening, everyone out there, and welcome to a very special Australian Women's Weekly Books and Bubbles in lockdown, as we are here in Sydney, and those viewers in other parts of Australia. I feel your pain, although Michael has just been telling me that's what he's been doing for 27 years. So maybe...
Yeah, but I mean, mine was self-inflicted lockdown, you know. I've chosen to be locked down for 27 years.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, which in my case here in Sydney is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders both past, present and future. My guest this evening is crime thriller Michael Robotham. And first of all, I have a few housekeeping points I'd like to run through. If you haven't already, you can purchase Michael's new book, When You Are Mine, from our wonderful event partner, QBD. There's a link in the chat box on your screen. Please do go out there and buy it if you haven't already. I promise you, you will not regret it. Michael, check in the post, please. Send your questions through for Michael as we talk, and I will get through as many as I can as we go and at the end. They can be entered into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're tuning in via Facebook, you can leave a comment. If you enjoy tonight, even if you don't, please don't miss 2 more great evenings coming up. I promise you, you will enjoy tonight. No, I shouldn't have said that. On Wednesday, September 22, I'll be talking to Natasha Lester. And on Wednesday, October 6, we're talking to Ruth McIver. These events are all free. Just visit booksandbubbles.com.au to register. Also there, you'll be able to sign into our newsletter, and there you can be the first to find out about all the upcoming events, and also our past events are available for you to watch there on demand. So on to tonight. I know you're all already huge fans of Michael, which is why you're here, but just in case there are any newcomers to Michael's work, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk through a few of his triumphs in a very minor way, because I know he hates this bit and he's told me to keep it short and sweet. But you know, there's a lot to champion here, Michael, I have to say. Michael's first thriller, The Suspect, was published back in 2004. Is that right? 2004?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. It sold more than 1 million copies around the world. Incredible for a debut. I think it showed you were onto something. It featured the character of Joe O'Loughlin, a clinical psychologist who went on to appear in quite a few subsequent novels. A favourite character of mine, though, is forensic pathologist Cyrus Haven, who was the protagonist in Good Girl, Bad Girl and When She Was Good. Two brilliant novels you might want to check in on if you haven't read them already. To date, Michael has written 16 novels, which are translated into something like 25 languages. And he has won many awards along the way, very well deserved. They include 2 prestigious Gold Dagger Awards from the Crime Writers Association, the 2018 Australia Book Industry Association General Fiction Award. In fact, I presented you with that award on that night. And this year, the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award, an award sponsored by the estate of James Bond author Ian Fleming, no less. I asked him to bring along a dagger tonight.
Oh, I know, and I forgot.
Oh no, I was so wanting to see one of those daggers.
I was going to hold up a dagger, but sorry.
But
is this a dagger I see before me? No, there is no dagger.
I might see one in the window behind you if I look close enough. So yeah. Many of you will also have seen Michael's novel, The Secrets She Keeps, adapted into a 6-part TV series, which was shown here on Network 10 last year. If you missed it, please do hunt it out. It's very gripping stuff, pretty scary too, I have to say, gripped my house. But we're here tonight to talk about When You Are Mine. I'm going to do it again, which is set in London and introduces you to a whole new raft of characters, including Philomena McCarthy, a young officer with the Metropolitan Police Force. We'll come to that in a minute. But first of all, Michael, let's talk about how you got here in the first place. You were raised in a small Aussie country town, is that right?
I was born in Casino on the Northern Rivers, up near Lismore. And I moved to Gundagai when I was 5 years old, where the dog sits on the tucker box. And then I spent all my childhood in Gundagai before moving to Coffs Harbour on the New South Wales North Coast. But yeah, I was a country boy. My dad was a school teacher and he was moved between little towns my entire life.
And what are your favourite memories of that childhood? It sounds pretty halcyon.
Oh, look, it was very, very, I like it to very Huck Finn-like, it was swimming at the swimming hole, fishing at the fishing hole, cooking up a mess of victuals. No, not quite that southern, but no, it was very idyllic. I mean, that was an era when kids roamed free, and you'd leave at dawn, on a weekend. I'd be out of the house before the sun came up. My mother wouldn't see me until it got dark. And, I was probably 9 or 10 and you just I was roaming the gold mines, the old mine shafts around. Gundagai was a gold mining town, and getting into some mischief. I quite famously got brought home by the lone policeman that worked in Gundagai because me and my mate Muzzer Murray were pretending to be blind outside the Niagara Cafe because we were hungry and we wanted to raise a bit of money for a milkshake. And of course, everyone knew I was the teacher's kid and Muzzer Murray was the policeman's son. So, we got taken, got told off and taken, but that was the time really. It was a lot of fun.
Was that the full extent of your criminal childhood?
Oh no, I famously, when I was about 6 years old, borrowed a box of matches from the mantelpiece and went up to the back paddock behind our house and decided to light a little campfire. 6-year-olds are fascinated by fire. There'd only been about 6 years or 7 years of drought, and there was a strong nor'easter blowing, and my little fire didn't stay little for very long. And the first house that threatened belonged to the head of the Gundagai Rural Fire Brigade. And it took about 15 brigades to get this blaze under control. I raised the alarm, and then crawled up under our house. And I was up under the house, way in the back corner, underneath the floorboards, amongst the redback spiders, and listening to these sirens, and thinking that the entire town was burning down, and it was my fault. And I was determined never, ever, ever to come out from that that floor, under that floor. And it was really only my mother's cooking that dragged me out. And my father, took the old belt off, and they would that was sort of the era of that sort of thing. And he put his head through the little trapdoor and said, "Come out and take your punishment like a man." And I said, "I'm not a man, I'm just a boy." But yeah, I told that story at an event many years ago in Wagga Wagga, about 50 miles from Gundagai. And there was an intake of breath because all of these people from Gundagai had made the journey, and they had no idea until that moment that I was that pyromaniac that almost burnt the town down. And I literally have been back to Gundagai once, and I drove through it fearing that there were still wanted posters up on every power pole waiting for my return.
Maybe it's time to turn yourself in. Did you have siblings?
I had two brothers and I had two brothers and a sister. I was sort of the third child of four.
Right. And so did you have a role in that dynamic? It sounds like you were the naughty one.
Yeah, I was the one who was I was hyperactive as a kid, and which was a nightmare for my mother. And look, I know a lot of writers. They'll tell you stories about how they read books under their sheet at night with a torch when their parents told them to turn off the light, and that they devoured books. And I wasn't that sort of person. I mean, I was a typical kid who'd prefer to be outdoors. My father was an English history teacher, and I was surrounded by books, and I did read early, and I love books, but they weren't a passion for me. But I guess I was more the I was more the I was tilting at windmills. I was sort of I was tormenting snakes, and I was doing all sorts of things which nowadays you'd think, how did I survive? When you think you'd find where the brown snakes lived and you'd throw rocks at them until they came in at you. You're thinking, what sort of idiot?
You're scaring me. You're definitely scaring me. As British born, I don't like snakes at all. Did you read any crime novels as a kid?
Oh, look, I don't know. I mean, I don't recall reading crime. I know. I mean, the really early days, it was sort of the classic Enid Blyton type stuff, which I suppose were very gentle sort of mystery stories. In the days before politically things were so PC, there were the Biggles novels.
Oh God, my brothers loved the Biggles novels.
The Biggles novels. And I guess it was the writer that most influenced me to want to be a writer when I was very young was Ray Bradbury, who I discovered when I was about 10 or 11. And he really wrote more science fiction or, those sort of Twilight Zone type stories that slightly, had that sort of fantastical element to them, and they were quite scary. And I discovered his writings when I was about 11, and he captivated me.
So when did you decide you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, look, I tell a story. I mean, I think I wanted to write from about that age. I was very fortunate, and look, people will have heard this story, but I'll quickly tell it again for the people who haven't. I wrote a letter to Ray Bradbury when I was 11 years old. I addressed it to Ray Bradbury, Random House, New York. So I looked at the front of a book, and that was what his publisher, and I don't recall putting a stamp on the envelope. I was in Gundagai at that point. And about 3 months later, a package arrived. I came home from primary school, and there was a package, and inside were the 3 Ray Bradbury titles that weren't available in Australia, and a letter from the great man himself, who said how thrilled he was to have a young fan on the far side of the world. That was an enormously generous gesture, and I think one of the reasons I became a writer is because of that generosity. But I'll just quickly tell you the story that I wrote that story up about 6 years ago, and I said that Ray Bradbury once said that Jules Verne was his literary father, and Mary Shelley was his literary mother, and Edgar Allan Poe was the bat-winged cousin they kept locked in the attic. And I said that I said that Ray Bradbury was my literary father, and Steinbeck and Hemingway were my overachieving older brothers. And that story appeared in an American magazine. And a week later, Alexandra Bradbury contacted me, sent me an email, Ray Bradbury's youngest daughter. I had no idea Ray was still alive. And she said, my father is 91 years old and completely blind, but I read him the story that you wrote, and I wanted you to know you made an old man cry. And he wanted you to know that you are his son.
Oh,
and,
wow. That's giving me goosebumps.
Yeah. And it was, we made plans to meet in LA when I next toured in America, and he died a few weeks before I arrived, which is still, I'm gutted by the fact I never got to meet him and thank him in person. But Ray Bradbury is, I think, the reason that I became a writer.
And which of his novels do you like the best? I mean, Fahrenheit 451, I suppose.
Oh, I read Fahrenheit 451 probably once a year, and it stands up. You sort of think in this digital age that a book about people burning books and the temperature the paper burns at, wouldn't have any resonance. But because we're living in this time of cancel culture and censorship and big social media companies harvesting our data and all of that, Fahrenheit 451 resonates today just as powerfully as it did when it was written. It is a truly, truly great novel.
Yeah, it really, I mean, when you think about what's happening in Afghanistan, for instance, as we speak, I can imagine there are a few books being burnt there. It's pretty scary stuff, isn't it?
Mm.
Did you like Orwell as well?
Yeah, I think Orwell suffered a little bit from, a lot of writers suffer as well. And for a long while, Jane Austen suffered for me. If you're taught at school a book, they flog it to death, and all joy and all passion gets squeezed out of it because you're, and for that reason, for decades, I hated Jane Austen because I was forced to study her. And then Jane and I are now best mates. I think she's a genius, but it took a long while because, unfortunately, the way these books are taught in school, they don't engender great love for the books. Oftentimes, they just make you, despair and despise them. And
what about Hemingway? Who's your favorite? What's your favorite Hemingway? This always divides people, doesn't it?
It's funny. It doesn't divide me. I know exactly what because it's actually my favorite book.
Right.
And it's one that people don't expect. It's A Movable Feast. And it's Hemingway's
in Paris.
His posthumous memoir, because he wrote it when he was in his 20s and he was living in Paris and he was starting his career as a writer, freezing in a garret, living off oranges and whatever short stories he could sell and whatever money he took, he'd take to the racetrack and try to double so he had a bit more to survive on. But I took my battered copy of A Movable Feast to Paris in my mid-20s when I first went there.
Of course,
and it was my tour guide. And I went to the same bars, I went to the same cafes, the same bookshops, I went to the places he lived, and I thought, I just wanted a little bit of that magic to rub off on me. And it's also full of the most wonderful advice for writers. He has these beautiful little gems of advice for writers in there. And so hands down, it's my favorite. It's
a really slim volume, but it's packed, isn't it? It's packed with gems of wisdom.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I love that book.
Sun Also Rises, by the way, is mine.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Yes. But I'll take your Movable Feast and I'll up you Sun Also Rises. Now, you didn't actually start writing books, did you? You started as a newspaper reporter. Where did you work? I started as a cadet journalist on the old Sydney Sun, which was an afternoon newspaper in Sydney. There's a Sun on the Mirror, but there were two afternoon newspapers. We were one of the only cities in the world that still had two afternoon papers. I started in 1979. I was in the same cadet intake as Geraldine Brooks. The wonderful Geraldine, still a very good friend of mine. She started as a cadet in the same intake as me. She's obviously gone on to win Pulitzer Prizes and be one of our finest novelists. I got a job. I left school. I was one of the last people employed by Fairfax straight from school. I deferred a law course and I was 17 years old, and there were 6,000 applicants for 16 positions at Fairfax for cadets. And I managed to get one of those positions. Wow. And what sort of journalism did you do? Well, after newspapers, the bread and butter were court reporting and crime stories. I mean, it was very much
police rounds and court reporting, because that's what afternoon newspapers sort of did. If it bleeds, it leads. That was the way it was for the afternoon newspaper. So it was, so I did a lot of police rounds early, work nights, and it was, mixing with, if you're working, 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning, you're hanging around the King's Cross a lot, the red light district, and the only people awake at that hour are the pimps and the prostitutes and the pushers and the cops, and you're meeting. I mean, I tell people that this little wide-eyed country boy who, when I first came to Sydney, had never been in a lift before by myself and had never been in a building more than 3 stories high, learnt more in my first year working on that newspaper than I had in my entire life before then. It just opened my eyes.
Oh, I don't know. You knew how to throw rocks at a snake. I'm still impressed at that. Am I right in thinking you moved to work for the Daily Mail in England?
Not the Daily Mail. I went to England in 1985, and just thinking, there were two. Even though I still wanted to be a writer, I fell in love with journalism, and there were 2 great newspaper capitals. There was London and there was New York. And so I thought, I want to see if I can make it in London. And so I went there, and I went through that, did all the, doing the shifting at all the different newspapers, trying to get a shift, a reporting shift, or I pretended to be a sub-editor and managed to blag my way onto a few subs desks, but no, ultimately I was offered a contract on the Mail on Sunday, which was it was a different newspaper. It's now just the Sunday edition, really, but back then it was a brand new newspaper that was set up and completely different from the Daily Mail. But that's where I ultimately became senior feature writer.
Right. I used to work there, actually. Who was your editor?
Back in the Mail on Sunday. Well, but Stuart Stephen was my editor.
Oh, okay. Peter Wright.
But... Oh, no, he came later, I think.
Yeah. So you then moved into ghostwriting. Were you ghostwriting whilst you were a newspaper reporter? Was that a moonlighting thing, or did you move on?
No, I mean, I was acting features editor of the paper, and I invited a guy in to write. I commissioned a guy to write a story for us, and he was a ghostwriter, and I had never heard of a ghostwriter. And this particular guy had done Simon Weston, the Falklands hero that was badly burned, had done his autobiography, and Robert Swan, the first man to walk to both poles, and I was quite fascinated by this idea of that someone could ghostwrite, and I thought that might be the next step in my my writing career. And the first book I was offered, I had to turn down. It was Nichols and Peters, the 2 pilots who were shot down, the tornado pilots who were shot down by Saddam Hussein during the first Gulf War and imprisoned and tortured. And that book, Tornado Down, became a big bestseller. But I was asked to write that, and I didn't have the time. But the first book I did was, and I'd quit the paper by that point, was Oranges and Sunshine. The story of Margaret Humphreys, the Nottingham social worker who uncovered the child migrant scandal. And that got made into a film here with Hugo Weaving and David Wenham about 8 years ago now. It was made into a film. Wow.
And who else did you ghostwrite for? Are you allowed to tell us?
Only some. I did Lulu, 60s pop star Lulu, To Sir With Love, and Married to Morris Gibb, and all of that sort of thing. I did Lulu. I did Jerry Halliwell, Gins of Spice. I did Tony Bullimore, the yachtsman that we rescued from the Southern Ocean, a remarkable survival story. I did 15 in total. The one I don't like mentioning is Rolf Harris. For obvious reasons,
goodness.
But it was well before. I mean, there were clues. In hindsight, I could see clues, but it was all well before it ever blew up. The whole sexual allegations blew up.
What was Lulu like? Is she as fun as she seems?
She's gorgeous. Yeah, I mean, what I love about Lulu, I mean, people always imagine that celebrities lie in their autobiographies, that they're never going to tell the truth. And they're just image management jobs. And I'll never forget telling Lulu, saying to her, you have to tell me the truth. Look, there are certain things we can leave out because they're deeply personal, but you really have to, because if you leave something out that is really like a skeleton in the closet, if this book comes out and that skeleton comes out, this book is going to be laughed off the shelves if you don't mention it. And so she said, okay, no, I'll tell you the truth. And at some point, because Lulu looked so good, she was about 56, but she looked like she was about 26. I said, have you had any work done? Because all these women I knew were asking the question, oh, has she had any work done? And I asked her and she said, no. And I thought, right, leave it at that. And then about a week later, I hadn't seen her in a few days, and I had all these messages from her. Oh, she's desperately, message after message trying to contact me. Something terrible had happened. And I honestly thought something terrible had happened. And I finally got through to her. I said, Lulu, what's wrong? She said, I lied to you. I said, what do you mean? And I'm thinking love child. I'm thinking, affair with the Prince of Wales. I'm thinking, what did she lie about? And she said, I've had Botox,
And I'm 76.
Yeah, bless her. No, she was adorable. And the thing is with her, and it's a shame, the book was lovely, but I wish it could have been an audiobook because she bursts into song and she's got that amazing voice. And you just couldn't get that onto the page, obviously, the fact that she could just launch into a song at any moment to describe a moment or a scene. And it was wonderful.
Do you keep in touch with her?
Not for a while. I did for a long while, and we sort of Christmas cards. That's about it, really. I'm
pretty impressed with Christmas cards from Lulu. So how did you move from that to writing crime thrillers? How do you go from real life to fiction and crime as well?
Well, I didn't know it was a crime novel when I sat down and wrote my first book. I had a 3-month window between when I finished the Rolf Harris book and I'd been asked to do the Lulu book. And I'd met Lulu, and we got on famously, and so I had this sort of window before we could start work, and in this 3 months, I thought, what am I going to do? And so I wrote the first 117 pages of a book, which became The Suspect, and I didn't know it was a crime book. I didn't set out, so I'm writing a crime book. I just created the character of Joe O'Loughlin, and I knew I was thinking Hitchcock in terms of, a man caught in the wrong time in the wrong place, like mistaken identity, some sort of mystery, and that book triggered that part manuscript triggered a bidding war at the London Book Fair in 2002. And I didn't know how it finished. No one asked me. They publishers from all over the world bought it. And when it was finished, they said, this is a crime novel. And I said, really? And I said, yeah, you're a crime writer. I said, let's do it.
So they didn't know they were buying a crime writer.
Well, I didn't know I was becoming one. It's funny, when a lot of them signed multiple book deals, and I signed them, I should say. And when they asked me what I was going to write next, I had this idea for this romance, and they said, no. I said, why? And I said, well, you're a crime writer. And I said, since when? And they said, read your contract. And there it was. It said, you will write something of similar vein or in similar nature. And that's the first I knew officially. But I love the genre. I think it can shine a light into the darkest corners of society and the darkest corner of the human psyche. I have absolutely fallen in love with this genre. But initially I was the accidental crime writer.
So of course, now I'm going to ask about the romance. What was that? Are we going to see that? Have we seen that? Did you put that into something else?
Maybe, you're under another name.
Sorry, you have frozen for me.
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh,
sorry, everyone, that froze for me. But yes, tell me, I missed that answer. The romance, has the romance appeared?
You're going to have to wait for it. Maybe maybe elements of it have turned up in other books. I do quite like writing love stories into books, but I think I've managed to write a bit of both. Although I write crime stories, I try to put a lot of humor in them, and it's often all about relationships and family and men trying to be good fathers. And so I think I've managed to put a lot of what I would have wanted to say in other books into the books I write.
Right. So where do you get the inspiration for the books? I know this is the $1 million question in your case, $1 million reader question. Where does it come from?
Oh, look, I never use, Juliet, I never use inspiration in terms of the word, because often my books are seated in real life events and crimes. I mean, When You Were Mine literally began, this is the latest one, with a documentary or a news report about the police failing to investigate domestic violence when it involves one of their own. They're notoriously bad at investigating abuse complaints when they're made by the wives or girlfriends of police officers. And it got me thinking, I mean, how helpless does that make you if you're a victim or a survivor? I like the term survivor, but the very people you would normally turn to for help aren't going to help you because they're police officers and they're mates of your partner. And similarly, the very shelters that you would go to seek refuge, the police know where they are, these secret women's refuges. And similarly, the police have at their disposal that phenomenal array of technology and databases to track your phone, to track your vehicle, to find you wherever you try to hide. And so I guess that was the seed of the idea behind When You Were Mine.
Wow. It sounds like there's a lot of mistrust in the police there.
Well, I think in this case, it's I mean, and I sense that's the basis of I think the book makes that clear as well, that the police should investigate these things. They're getting better at investigating these things their own, but unfortunately, for a long while, they have simply failed to investigate their own when it comes to domestic abuse. I mean, they often fail to investigate domestic abuse full stop, let alone when it involves one of their own officers.
So you start with an idea like that, which in this case, very topical idea, an important idea. Then you start plotting, do you? Do you have big whiteboards with all sorts of maps all over the place? And
I don't. I'm one of those weird creatures that don't plot. I simply start a book and have no idea how it's going to go. And there have been books that I've written where I've got to the penultimate chapter and I have not known how it was going to finish and who the villain was going to be. I'm writing one at the moment like that, where I've got 5 or 6 possibles, and I'm thinking, and the one advantage of that is if you don't know in advance, is that it's exciting for me, and also I figure the reader won't pick it if I don't know yet, then the reader shouldn't know, and I think sometimes when books are really heavily plotted, that authors try so hard to hide the details that they make it obvious, or to me, it's writing is organic. I love the fact that when I come in from my cabana of cruelty, of an afternoon, and I say to my wife, "You wouldn't believe what just happened." That if I am excited by it, then the reader will also be surprised by it.
You also write a lot in the first person and in the present tense. Why do you choose to do that?
Well, first person became an obvious one for me because having done 15 autobiographies for other people, they're all written in the first person, and it was all about capturing a voice. Lulu is a completely different voice to Jerry Halliwell, to Rolf Harris, to Dennis Thatcher, to whoever, Tony Bullimore. And it's all about capturing their voice so perfectly that nobody recognized my fingerprints. So first person, I create fictional characters that live and breathe in my imagination. So to me, they're real. I mean, I'll tell you how real they are, is that when I created Joe O'Loughlin and that book sold on a part manuscript, I didn't know how it ended. And I got towards the end of the book, still not knowing how Joe O'Loughlin was going to get out of this. You know, he was wanted for murder, his family life, his career, everything was crumbling. And I had no idea how to save him. And then I had this eureka one night. I woke and thought, oh, I know how he's going to get out of this. And I wrote manically for 48 hours to get the story down, because I was so concerned that if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, Joe O'Loughlin would go to prison for murder for the rest of his life. And so I had to get it down so that he would be safe. That's how real he'd become in my mind. And so that's why the first person's important. The present tense was something just started quite early. It was actually my agent said to me, because I'd said it first person, but past tense. And he just sort of said, it created great immediacy. It created this idea of, you know, it was happening literally as you're reading each page. This is happening now. And I thought, let me try it. And there are some readers that don't like first person present books. Their traditional crime novels tend to be third person, you know, there are some people that don't like it. But to me, I just think it's what I do now.
Well, I like it because I think it does give that immediacy. And a lot of the crime novels, as you say, are written in third person past. They have that sort of noir feel to them, which sort of brings in another character who is the writer, whereas you're taking yourself out of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge challenge for me as well. I mean, with the new book, to write through the eyes of Philomena McCarthy. I mean, she's 26 years old. She's a young policewoman. You know, I am obviously not 26 anymore. And, you know, I'm balding and graying and grumpier by the day middle-aged man. And so to me, as a writer, what greater challenge could there be than to try to inhabit the skin and look through the eyes of the world through this character, Philomena McCarthy, and hopefully get her voice right.
And you have written quite a few very strong female characters. You're obviously a man in a house full of women, aren't you? You've got 3 daughters.
Yeah,
there's only
myself and the dog, and we've both been spayed when it comes to yeah, surrounded by women. Married for 33 years and 3 daughters. But no, look, I have written a lot. You know, I ghostwrote a lot for women, like Lulu and Jerry Halliwell and Margaret Humphreys. And but to me, it's still the ultimate challenge, because the greatest readers of fiction are women. The greatest readers of crime fiction are women. And if I get it wrong, I know there'll be a lot of people that'll tell me that you're just a bloke thinking he knows what a woman thinks and feels. You know, and so I work really, really hard to see if I can get that voice right.
And has that changed over the years? Has that matured, that understanding of what it's like to be a woman in your books?
Yeah, look, I think in the early days, it's funny, when I wrote The Secret She Keeps, which was told from the point of view of two women, Agatha and Megan, who were both pregnant at the beginning of the book. And I think the very first time I did it was Alicia Barber in a book called The Night Fairy. And I think I got that wrong in places. I really do. And I spent a lot of time reading online blogs written by young women, and it sounds, this sounds flippant, but women aren't going to the office on Monday and talking about the rugby league results from yesterday. I mean, then, the simple fact of the matter, they do talk about and think about and worry about different things to men. So you do have to do a lot of eavesdropping and a lot of reading and to sort of try to understand what they're thinking about and their concern. Look, I don't say I have any great insight. I love it. Like Joe O'Loughlin, probably my greatest creation as a psychologist, had this remarkable insight into human behavior. That's what made him a brilliant psychologist. but there are two people that he could not read, two people that were complete mysteries to him. And one was the woman he loved, and the other was himself. And I think that probably applies to me.
I mean, I think you told me before that you kind of steal a few conversations from round your own dining table and use them in your books. Is that right?
All the time. There's a conversation, I think it might have been a book called Bleed for Me, where Joe O'Loughlin's talking to his daughter, Charlie. And he asks her, because he discovers that Charlie's school friend, Charlie's still at school, she's quite young. She's sort of probably 14 or 15. And Joe O'Loughlin discovers that one of Charlie's friends is having sex. And so he decides to just ask Charlie if she's having sex. And she pleads the fifth, and then she uses this, when he says, no, I need an answer. And she uses this incredible, lawyer-like technique of saying, well, if I tell you the truth, I risk disappointing you. And if I lie to you, I'll definitely disappoint you. So therefore, she just twisted him into knots until he walked away thinking, is she having sex?
What do they think of your books? I've got
a middle daughter who has never read one of them, who uses the excuse that she's terrified she's going to read a sex scene written by a father and be traumatized and need therapy for the rest of her life. I've got a younger daughter who is just into scary things, and the darker the book, the more she'll like it. And I've got an elder daughter who's read probably half of them. And I think they like it, like the Evie Cormack, the character I created in The Teenager. They love it when I create teenage characters. I think they do relate to the younger characters that I create.
Now, When You Are Mine, we'll come on to this now more clearly. It's a very powerful standalone novel with this very interesting female lead character, British cop Philomena, who also happens to be the daughter of a notorious and feared gangster. Tell me, what do you think of Philomena? Do you like her? Do you have to like her as a writer?
Although I think if I had a 3-word motto, and I don't like 3-word mottos or slogans, it would be make them care. And so I'm one of those true believers that there are no rules in this game, and the truly great writers can break every rule. I'm not one of those writers. And so the rule that I tend to keep to is that if the reader doesn't care about your main character, then they've got no reason to carry on reading. They don't, and we've all been in that situation watching a TV show or reading a book where we cease to care about a single character. And at that point, we normally want to just switch off or put it down. So I love Philomena. I like her a lot. I like her energy. I like her commitment. I like the fact that she's got this, she's defied the odds to become a policewoman when she's come from a family of complete gangsters, and when she, rejected her time after time, sort of saying that they're not going to let a fox into the chicken coop to set up a barbecue chicken joint. They're just not going to let her in, and she said, but I'm not like my family. Let me in.
I mean, the book opens with 11-year-old Philomena on a London bus when a bomb explodes. Of course, this scene did happen. We're talking about the 2005 London bombings. I was there, actually, in the Mail on Sunday offices, as it turns out. It was a terrifying time in the UK. Why did you choose that moment?
It's funny. Well, my agent had my longtime London agent had a daughter who was on the underground when those bombs went off, and she survived, but for a long while they were uncertain where she was. And I guess I was looking for an opening to explain why Philomena, given her background, would choose to join the London Metropolitan Police. And this idea that she was on a double-decker bus where a bomb peels the top off and she survives, but a young policewoman comforts her when she's sitting amongst the debris and the body parts. and she looks at this young policewoman and says, I think in the book it says, if this were a disaster movie, you would be the hero. You would be the one that is going to survive. And she just wants to be that person.
It's well, a literally explosive opening, but it is a very poignant opening. Why did you want to set your book in London? We've got a few readers, watchers, audience. I'm used to having readers, but people in the audience here asking that question. Why is it set in London? Why are we not in Australia?
Well, what happened was I obviously lived and worked in London for a long while, even though I'm very Australian. Look, the short answer is many, many years ago in 1985, I almost had a novel published in London that was set in Australia in a small fishing village. I refer to it as the greatest ever unpublished Australian novel. It missed out. It missed out by a single vote in that publishing meeting. And I was told afterwards that if I'd set that same story in England, Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, they would have published it in a heartbeat, but it was just too hard in 1985 to sell a story set in Australia to a UK market. And that was in the back of my mind when I sat down to write The Suspect, or with that window between Rolf and Lulu, when I wrote again, I thought, okay, let's set a book in London and see what happens. And it obviously triggered a bidding war, and now I have publishers falling over themselves to want me to pull that novel out of the bottom drawer. But as I like to remind people that while it stays in the bottom drawer, it will always be Australia's greatest ever unpublished Australian novel. The moment I pull it out,
now everyone wants to see it, definitely. I mean, it's a very topical tale, as you have talked about, looking at issues of coercive control, domestic abuse, toxic male-centric work cultures. Did you deliberately set about looking at that area? I mean, it's very topical at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think that's one of the great advantages of being a crime writer is you can look at certain issues that are topical. And I've done, people smuggling in the past, and I've done lots of sort of very topical issues. And this one, when you look at what's happened in Australia, it's one woman a week is dying at the hands of an intimate partner. In the UK, it's 3 women a week. In America, it's 3 women a day. It is a huge issue, and it's obviously very hot button. I mean, obviously, the whole issue of Brittany Higgins and those sort of things happened after I'd started writing this book. But I mean, this is always coming. Sometimes an issue it's coming. And it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. The Me Too movement had obviously started when I began writing this book, and so I wanted to look at it. And I know a lot of other books have looked at coercive control and domestic abuse, but I also wanted to look at that idea of toxic friendships as well.
And why do we like reading crime thrillers so much? They're frequently top of the bestseller lists. You are one of many crime writers, very successful one. Why do we love them?
Oh, look, I think I've heard lots of much more cleverer people than me. Much cleverer people than me have. I once had dinner with the wonderful P.D. James before she passed away, and she said that she believed it was because all of us murder enough to save someone we love. We're all capable of taking a life, and that fact alone, that little dark side of our psyche, means that that's why we're fascinated. And Stephen King talked about it, about why we drive slowly past accident scenes. It's almost like we're picturing someone we know underneath that white sheet. We're picturing ourselves beneath that white sheet, maybe. But there's that fascination with death and with what we're capable of. And thirdly, I think it's because we live in one of the most beautiful, safest, and we are safest countries in the world. but there's still a degree of corruption, and there's still a degree of bad people getting away with crimes. And normally in crime fiction, the bad people don't get away with it. And in real life, we don't get that satisfying ending, whereas in books we do.
And that is another of my questions. Do you feel an obligation to have a moral outcome?
It's funny. I mean, I think it's to a degree, yes. I remember being interviewed once in one of the Scandinavian countries where, honestly, you know, you could write a book in those countries, in Norway or Sweden or whatever, where you had a missing child. And if at the end of the book, the child is still missing or is found dead, they would think that was enormously profound and deep and satisfying. And I would look at them and go, well, I tell you what, if you have someone to invest in 350 pages in the search for a child, you better find that child alive, because otherwise, you know, and you know, these same people would accuse me of Hollywood endings because I had a moral ending. And I think, well, to a degree, I think what I will say is my protagonists are damaged by what they go through. They are not the same people at the beginning, at the end. They are damaged. A little bit of their humanity has been taken from them. So they are not as well or as complete as they used to be. But the ending will at least be a moral one, and that, you know, the hero will be damaged, but will have succeeded.
Now, I'm going to look at some of our audience questions now. A couple of people are asking about your writing process. I know we've talked a little bit about that, but do you write for a certain number of hours a day? Do you have to produce a certain number of words? How do you do? Do you just stare out of the window and it comes to you?
Oh, I love this. I always love that. I like to tell my wife that you do realize that when I'm lying on the sofa asleep, I'm actually working. No.
Good try.
Oh, look, I write every day. I once had a wonderful journalist called Greg Barrett from The Australian came to do a profile on me. He was supposed to follow me around for 3 days and write 3,000 words on the life of a writer. And he gave up after a day and he wrote 1,000 words. And he said, you don't do anything. And I said, well, yeah, welcome to my world. It goes on up here, pal. You know. And he even said to my wife, I said, what does he do on a weekend? And she said, oh, he writes. He said, you know, what does he do Christmas Day? Well, he'll have dinner, but then he'll go and write. You know, I mean, it's like the wonderful Peter Corris, the wonderful late great Australian crime writer Peter Corris said that writing is like breathing. You know, I just have to do it. Just have to do it.
And is there a certain number of words? I mean, are you hitting?
No, not really. I mean,
or anything?
Not really. I think because I don't plot in advance, the one thing I will say, if you're going to do it the way I do it, and look, some writers, I'm telling you, you're better off plotting in advance because you get sidetracked otherwise. I have one little theory, is that at any time in the story, when I finish a scene, I know that I can go in 5 or 6 different directions as my next scene, and I'm happy. Because I can go that way and investigate. If it doesn't work, I'll go and try that way. And I throw a lot of words away that way. So that's why it doesn't really come down to word counts, because some days you'll throw 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 words away and finish with one line. You know, if it's a good line, it doesn't matter. But when I'm writing, if I reach the point where there's only one way for the story to go, a single track left, I'm terrified that could be straight off a cliff, and in which case I'll be pulling and throwing tens of thousands of words away to go back and start again.
Did you get writer's block?
No, I think that's one of the great things at A Movable Feast we mentioned earlier. It gave me one of Hemingway's great pieces of advice is that when you finish a scene, or when you're getting towards the end of a scene, and it's towards the end of a writing day, and the temptation is to write that last paragraph and go off and pour yourself a glass of wine, never write the last paragraph. Because the next day when you come back to your desk, you have something to write and you're back into the swing. You know, and that was his advice.
And what advice would you give to budding writers out there wanting to follow in your footsteps?
Look, I would say write and write and write, and when you're sick of writing, write some more. Every writer I've ever known produces a manuscript that they think is complete rubbish. But the thing that I think sets writers apart from the people that want to write is the ability to polish that turd until it absolutely shines. And the other thing is, when you do read, take books apart. And it's not the truly great books that inspire me to write, because the truly great books, I can't get my fingers inside to take them apart to see how they're made, because they're so beautiful, they're so complete, they're so perfect. It's the books that I read and go, oh, I enjoyed that, but if they had done this, I think it would have been better. It's when you start reading and thinking, I could have made that book better, that maybe you're starting to become a writer.
Mm-hmm. I've got Lynette here saying she's just finished your new book and loved it. Do you decide whether a book is going to become a series or a standalone from the outset? So obviously you've had both.
Yeah, well, no, it's funny. The answer is no, because I had no idea that Joe O'Loughlin would be a series. I wrote that and I assumed that Joe O'Loughlin would only ever be in one book, because, you know, what sort of idiot would give his main character early onset Parkinson's if he expected him to have a long career? And it was really only public demand, with people saying, oh, he's such a great character, bring him back. And it's a bit like Philomena McCarthy. I wrote this as a standalone, but the number of people that have said, oh my God, you have to write about Philomena again. We have to find out about her and her family. And so who knows?
And lots of people are asking exactly that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, I mean, so there's a possibility. I mean, the book I'm writing now, which will come out next year, is another Sarah Save and Edie Cormack story, which carries that story on. But maybe after that, I can do a Philomena book. Or there's also a possibility that I can't tell you who's playing Joe O'Loughlin. I wish I could. But the Joe O'Loughlin series starts filming in the UK in either this month or next month. A huge name star is playing the lead. It's being made by World Productions, who made Line of Duty and The Bodyguard and The Bletchley Circle. So they're a great company. And I'm slightly tempted, if the TV series, it's a 6-parter based on the first novel, The Suspect. I'm sort of tempted to maybe bring Joe O'Loughlin out of retirement and do another Joe book to coincide with that series, but I haven't decided.
That is very exciting. What did you think of the dramatization of The Secret She Keeps? Were you happy with that?
I was, actually. I mean, I moved it to Australia, but I thought the casting was tremendous. I think it was the second or third most watched show on the BBC last year. It was the first Australian series to ever premiere on BBC One, and it was only beaten by Normal People as the most watched series in the UK. So, and initially when I watched it, I thought, oh, they've made it too dramatic. They've ramped it up too much. But I actually think I still think they did a wonderful job. And they're due, and sadly our COVID restrictions, but they were due to start filming the second series of that this month, but it's now been put off to November because we can't get the stars into the country. But there will be a second series of The Secret She Keeps.
Do you get involved in them, or do they just buy the book and?
Well, the first one I obviously wrote the book and was involved. This one, because there was no book, the second series, I've helped with the storyboarding of an idea, and I've written one of the scripts for one of the episodes. But really, you know, I've decided through all of this is I love the fact that I'm a writer, because when I'm a novelist, I'm God and I get to choose everything. Whereas when you work in TV and film, you have all these other people who are, you know, producer notes and distributor notes and network notes and director notes and actor notes, and a lot of cooks in there. And I'm not saying they don't produce a wonderful, wonderful stew, but I'm a loner, I think. I've been self-isolating too long.
I'm being asked by Davina, do you tend to travel, which you won't at the moment, but in the past, did you tend to travel to the location that your book is based in, such as Amsterdam for the night ferry?
Absolutely. And I had a wonderful guide through Amsterdam for the night ferry. He was the same man that who guided John Irving through Amsterdam for all the books of John Irving, all the times he wrote about Amsterdam. And he's actually in my book. He's the whistling policeman. He was famous there. He'd worked the beat of the red light, walked the beat of the red light district. And everyone used to joke that, you know, he whistled. And so they always knew he was coming, you know, and they could always, all the criminals could run. And he would always say, yes, but when I want to catch them, I don't whistle. And, but yeah, no, I do. I tend to, COVID's made it hard, but I tend to, the only book I've written where I haven't been to see the scenes was when I wrote The Wreckage, and I didn't go to, my wife refused to let me go to Beirut, war-torn Beirut, for obvious reasons. But yeah, I mean, they're so accurate, and people might have heard me say this, that I've had lawyers go through my books before I publish and tell me I have to change things because, you know, they say, is that house where you describe it? Does it look the way you describe it? You know, and I say, yes, on that corner, exactly that way. I say, you have to change it. You've just put 3 bodies in their front room and they don't appreciate it. They won't appreciate it. Yeah.
They can't sell it now. Davina's asking, what's your favorite location?
Oh, I must have, I'd loved, you should maybe think of Amsterdam. I adored doing the night ferry, and I, you know, which was a third of it set in Amsterdam. And I set a lot of books down in the West Country and down near Bath. And a lot of that was because I was worried that having, you know, I've been back living in Australia now for 20 odd years. And even though I go back to the UK 2 or 3 times a year, I was worried I was losing touch. And I didn't want to be one of those people that wrote a version of Britain that wasn't realistic. You know, it's like watching, you know, Dick Van Dyke play a chimney sweep in Mary Poppins. You know, you doesn't quite ring true. So I moved the books out of London into the West Country because those sort of little towns and villages don't change. But hopefully I can keep, I mean, I do love the West Country. I do love down there, sort of Somerset and Bath and Avon and that area.
Very pretty. And Jane Austen, of course.
There you are. Absolutely.
Yes. Any more novels featuring Evie?
Yeah, I'm working on one now. I can't tell you the title because it hasn't been decided. Well, I think I know the title, but my publishers haven't quite caught on yet. And so there's an Evie Cormac, Cyrus Haven book, which should be out in July of 2022.
Okay. Sarah asks, have you ever not put something into one of your books because it was too personal? Good question, Sarah.
Oh, that's a good question. I look at, there's a lot of personal stuff in there, but I think I can put it in because it's hidden and people don't find it relates. They don't think it relates to me. I do think, and this is a bit of advice for wannabe writers out there, I've written scenes that I absolutely love, which I've had to cut. And there's one particular scene which I've tried to put in every book I've ever written. I love this scene. And each time when I go through, I go, it doesn't quite work there. And so, and I have this theory, it could well be the last scene in the very last book I write. I'll just shoehorn it in there going, I got it in there.
And now we want to know what that scene is, but you're not going to tell us,
No,
are
I'm
you?
not going to.
What does your wife think of your books, I'm being asked?
Oh, she's my first designated reader. Look, in truth, she would love it if I became the first crime writer in history that wrote a crime novel without a crime in it.
Too much violence, Michael, too much violence.
Well, and more it's a case of I make her fall in love with these characters. And I know when I give her the book, you know, and I initially want to watch her reading it, and she refuses to let me watch her physically read the book, but I haven't shown it to another human being in a year. So I want to see a reaction. And so I get set out of the bedroom and then I look through a crack in the door. And if I see a smile, I'll go, what was that bit? You know, and then she'll send me off to my cabana. And at some point she'll come storming up the path and she'll hammer me in the chest and she'll go, bring them back, you bastard, bring them back. Because something terrible will have happened to someone that I made a love.
Do you change anything based on what she said?
No. And she's wise enough, and she's wise enough to know that it's all brilliant. it's all wonderful, and I'm a complete genius because editors and agents, they can they can put up with my fury when anyone's I'm one of those people that when people send their first editorial notes, I will write the most poisonous 12-page reply, which I will never send, because 24 hours later, when I've calmed down, I'll go, yeah, they're not wrong. But my first reaction is always, no, no, no.
Any of your children aspiring to become writers, Rachel asks?
I've got a brilliant, well, they're all brilliant, my daughters, but my eldest daughter, who goes by the name Alex Hope, which is a middle name, is 26 years old, 27 years old, and is pretty much the top female songwriter producer in America at the moment. She's been living in LA since she was 20, and she's written for some huge artists, and so they were all very good writers, but she channeled her creativity into writing songs and writing music rather than words.
Do you have a certain way of choosing your character names? Gillian asks.
Not really. I mean, I auction name in most books. There's a name auction for charity. The Joe Locken books, there was normally a name auction for a Parkinson's charity, and I'm always amazed at how much money people will pay to be immortalized in, and I always say to them, you could be a pedophile, you could be a serial killer, you could be, no promises, you will simply have a character named after you. But in fact, I do try to tailor the character a little bit to what I learn about them.
That's clever. Than that, I've never heard of that before. So you auction names for charity?
Yeah, there's certain writers used to have one, I can't think, it might be not Tess Gerritsen, it's one of them, it's called Name a Stiff, where you get to name the first body, can be your, in the book can be you. And so I loved it. I did it in The Secret She Keeps. I offered this was a big charity auction, it was quite a bit of money. And I offered the woman that bought it, she could be this very racy real estate agent who likes having affairs with married men, or she could be a young budding police detective or policewoman who looks after the family. And I thought, oh, she'll go for that. I mean, the glamour of and no, she went for the detective. But she's since appeared in the TV series, that character, and she's going to appear in the next TV series. So it keeps on giving that little.
Yeah, she picked the right one. Yeah. Look, Vida was very interested in your comment that women read crime novels more than men. Why do you think they're more popular with women?
Well, look, women, the greatest readers of fiction. I think that's the simple answer, is that the men that do read tend to love nonfiction. Not all of them, obviously, but they love, biographies, they love sporting biographies, military biographies, histories. They like stuff that is what they talk about being real. Whereas I'm a firm believer that great fiction is real. It tells the truth that can't be expressed any other way. Whereas women tend to be greater readers of fiction, and just on top of that, they then become the greatest readers of crime fiction, because it is the biggest genre within fiction.
Okay, Sarah has said, how can we access those auctions, because she's ready to open her purse.
Well, next time, I've never done an online one, and maybe it's in the COVID times, it's time to do it. It's normally at some big charity ball. I was doing one for sadly it's been cancelled here in Sydney. It was to raise money for a women's shelter, a refuge here in Sydney for women and children who are fleeing from abuse. And there was a big ball arranged for about now, actually, and it was going to be one of the auction items that night. And since that's not going, maybe I should arrange to find out some way of doing it online, because it was such a good cause, and I think it'll work well.
Well, look, thank you, Michael. Sadly, we've run out of time. In fact, we've run over time. We could talk forever. I do have one final question, though. You're on a desert island. You can take one book and one luxury item. What are they?
Look, I've mentioned A Movable Feast, but I think I'm going to have to take some huge anthology that's got lots of books in it, because I think even I would struggle with A Movable Feast as my only book. It's a bit small.
It's a bit small.
Yeah, maybe complete works of Shakespeare or something. I don't know. One luxury item, a sand wedge, because I could just practice my bunker play on that desert island. But you've got to give me a golf ball as well, though, because I need a golf ball.
Now that's very middle-aged of you, Michael. That really is. Thank you very much, Michael. It has been wonderful talking to you. Thank you to Hachette. Thank you to our partner, QBD. Thank you to everyone out there for coming. And just once more, if you haven't already, you can purchase Michael's new book, When You Are Mine, from our event partner, QBD, a link in the chat box on your screen. Don't forget, there are 2 more great events coming up. On Wednesday, September 22, we're talking to the wonderful Natasha Lester. And on Wednesday, October 6, we're talking to Ruth McIver. These events are all free. Visit booksandbubbles.com.au, register for them there. You can also hear this interview again and catch up on all the other Books and Bubbles events. Thank you very much, everyone. Michael, congratulations. It's a wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Juliet. Wonderful job.
Pleasure.